I'm looking
Hi.
for the
Excellent. I think we're ready to get
link
started.
to
This is a
the
really big
Google Doc. Oh, is my mic live?
So if anybody has any
Maybe comment then.
logistical problems, let me know. Oh, there we go. Hey, so welcome everyone back to the Global Open Research Commons Working Group Breakout session. It's good to see you guys, really is. The Plenary program has a link to the collaborative notes document. In that collaborative notes document, I've also put a link to the slides. So view this however you like. What we're going to do today, I'm going to go ahead and jump in and give you the agenda. We're going to do a quick welcome and icebreakers. For those of you who haven't been attending or been able to attend or catch up on the working group, we're going to give a recap of what happened at P19 and our current state of the work so that everyone understands where we are. And then we're going to have a live discussion, update from each of the task groups, and expected outcomes from the workshop that's on Friday. I hope all of you have signed up to attend. It's going to be a great event. And then really fortunate to have the EOSC Finnish Forum sharing the stage with us today, talking about how the GORC work is helping them. So having said that, I first need to tell you that I quit. No, I'm kidding. I am leaving my current position with the International Technology Office at the World Data System April 14th. And so it feels appropriate at that point to step down and no longer be a co-chair. But because you guys are the most interesting thing in my life right now, I am going to stay involved with the working group. So I'll still be involved with the task groups. I would very much like to be leading or co-leading a writing group, if at all possible, if you guys are comfortable with that. So I would only do this because we are really fortunate to have CJ stepping up. So most of you probably have received emails or posts from CJ over the past 6 months or so, and he will be stepping into the new co-chair position along with Davika and Mark and Andrew. So with that said, now's the time to turn over. This is the official handover of the clicker. Thank you, CJ.
All right, thanks. Yeah, so hi for those of you who haven't met me yet. Definitely see a lot of new faces here, which is great. Welcome to the Global Open Research Commons Working Group session. I'm CJ. I'll be assuming a co-chair role with the GORC Working Group as of April when Karen steps down. And so what we wanted to start with today was kind of a welcome and icebreakers, knowing that not necessarily everyone attending this session will be familiar with the GORC work. So GORC, which you've heard us abbreviate multiple times, stands for Global Open Research Commons International Model Working Group. So GORC Working Group for short, because why would we continue to say that? And our mandate is to generate a set of pertinent attributes to identify common features across commons by reviewing and identifying attributes or features currently implemented by a target set of GORC organizations, and when possible, identifying how they measure their user engagement with these features. This is laid out in a lot more detail in our case statement, but essentially what we're trying to do is find out what makes a commons a commons. And not only what makes a commons, but how do we kind of set a list of things that would be desirable for a commons to have if they wanted to be a part of the true global open research commons network or framework. And so part of that, identifying a current commons and what they do is we have an ongoing speaker series. So that's kind of an introduction to the GORC and very, very quickly. But I wanted to ask a couple of icebreaker questions because, icebreakers is up there on the slide as well. And so I just wanted to get a show of hands, and those online, I encourage you to raise your virtual hands as well, or physical hands if Mark can see them. And tell me, why are you attending this session today? Like some of you in the front row, certainly I know why you're attending. Francois, you're a task group chair. I can't recognize everyone else. The lights are too bright, sorry. But why are you attending this session? I would genuinely want to know. Are you here to improve your knowledge of the area that's being covered by the GORC? Hand raised. Nice. Okay, excellent. Working group members and non-working group members alike want to improve knowledge of the area. Good. Do you want to comment on or influence the outputs of our working group? All right, yeah, some overlap, good. Who wants to contribute to the results of the group? Yeah, the previous one and the last one are a little similar. And who wants to see if this group overlaps with the others that you're involved with RDA? Maybe, yeah. I know that a lot of people who volunteer and work with RDA tend to be part of more than one interest group and more than one working group, so that's a good thing to look for overlaps. And last but not least, does anyone here actually work for a research commons in their day job? Yeah, okay. So people who work for or with research commons, we're creating, our outputs are for you. So thank you for being here. This is exactly who we want to talk to. So before we jump into what we've been working on recently, it's important to take a step back and look at what we covered previously. And I was not part of the working group for P19. So Mark, Andrew, Karen, please jump in and interrupt me if I'm misquoting. But we did have some key takeaways. So one of the main things was to restructure our documentation so far based on the GORC interest group typology of essential elements of the commons, which is a document that's making its way around. We're going to dive into that a little bit more closely in just a second. So we wanted to restructure what we were doing based on the work of our interest group that we work under. We wanted to expand our speaker series. And as Karen talked about yesterday in the co-located EOSC Future event, we have 13 speakers from beginning to end. We started with the IVOA in November of 2021, and then we'll be ending in August of this year, 2023. And all of our possible speaker series slots have been filled, which is incredible. And we also wanted to be careful not to reinvent any wheels. So what have other RDA groups been doing? What have groups in the community been doing so that we're not duplicating efforts? And really just make sure that we are starting from a good place. And so to this end, taking this information from P19 and the work that we continue to do, we've created a running list of attributes and features of commons. The list is enormous. It's got 583 items in it. It's organized by the GORC interest group essential elements typology, as was recommended in P19. And how we created that was through a literature review of both the speaker series as well as documentation from RDA and other sources such as R3 data. So where we go from here, before we go from here, let's talk about the essential elements of a commons, because we talked about it in terms of our organization. So where does that actually come in? So the interest group has defined a commons as a global trusted ecosystem that provides seamless access to high quality interoperable research outputs and services. So those of you who work for data commons, that probably sounds a little bit like what you do, or hopefully it does. The strapline, kind of our 1 second intro to commons, is digital research resources for the common good. Looking at the graphics, is there a pointer? I don't want to turn it off by accident, but so maybe I won't use it. So looking at the graphic, there's 3 elements in blue that are the underpinnings of digital elements that constitute parts of a commons where people interact with them. So that's compute and storage, research objects and services and tools. There's a central element in dark blue, which represents the way that standards and interoperability are the core of a commons. And then there's the elements in white, which are the social and human aspects of a commons. So quickly, just looking at what each one is. Governance, focused on defining the organization's purpose and the development of strategies. Oh, I can try.
So that one, the laser works on that one.
All right.
I've got no idea about the other one.
Nice. All right. Governance structures. So that one's really focusing on strategies, objectives, values, and policies that frame the purpose of the commons and how it's going to be pursued. Rules of participation are a set of policies defining a minimal set of rights, accountability, and obligations of the activities of those participating in the commons. Engagement. Methods used to interact with the broad stakeholder community and to involve them in activities. Human capacity, the ability of the commons to create a human-friendly environment for all of their stakeholders in all aspects. Sustainability are the models and agreements made on how to fund or resource for activities of the commons and how that's going to be sustained in the long term. Interoperability and standards. The way that how non-cooperating resources can integrate or work together to minimal effort, And then a standard would be the repeatable, harmonized, and agreed documented way of doing things. Compute, storage, and network or ICT infrastructure. The physical components, the hardware of what we're looking at. Services and tools. So a service, in the way that it's defined in the GORC interest group typology, is an element that can be invoked by a user to perform some action on their behalf. Tools enable researchers to perform one or more operations, typically on data, and then the output is data as well. And then the research objects are any output of a research process. So we tend to think of that as data, and there's been a lot of conversations already in the plenaries around the data part of it. But when we talk about research objects, we've kind of broadened that scope. So that's any output of the research process. Okay, so thinking about how we came to this review and processing, again, the recommendations from P19 to make sure that we're not duplicating data, and how do we actually get towards a workable solution to get to a list of attributes and features of commons? Well, one of the obvious inputs is the speaker series. That's the whole point. But in the speaker series, it's actually a little more complicated than that. We have a presentation from a representative of the commons. We have a questionnaire that they fill out beforehand. And then part of the questionnaire is also this e-infra checklist. So the e-infra scheme from EOSC. They tell us a little bit more about how they identify with the services through the e-infra checklist. We also do some background analysis on the speaker series too. So we look at the public information, like what's on their website. I will say the ARDC website in particular was extremely rich. And I really appreciate all the stuff in that. Thank you, Andrew, for having a great website. The public platforms and services, anything that I could find in terms of guides or before I was met with a login screen, essentially. Everything before logging in was what I looked for. We looked at reports, publications, and documents. So again, that could be guides, that could be annual reports, strategic plans, so on and so forth. And depending on the structure of the speaker and the commons, if they were a national infrastructure, for example, and they were reporting to a higher government department, sometimes we actually went and looked at that government department to see if we could get more information about how that structure works. In addition to the information from the speakers, and I also want to point out the public information was also about the speakers, but in addition, it's also outputs from public groups. So that's publications in general, that's other working groups, that's things from organizations such as CODATA or individual publications. We also took our examples and information from the case statement and the GORC interest group typology. And of course, the outputs from RDA interest groups and working groups. We have a really ambitious goal right now to have looked at and opened and read every single output that's currently available from RDA. I don't know if we'll get to do that, but that's the goal. So we took all of that information and we've investigated it and analyzed it to create some preliminary or intermediary outputs. One of them is the e-infra matrix. So how do our speakers identify with the e-infra scheme? Another one is a running list of attributes, which I mentioned, which is a huge 583 item list. And then also, how do our commons, how do our speaker series identify with that list? So that's the attributes matrix. We also have a separate running list of KPIs. So the KPIs we dug up through these various documents and information sources. And then how do our speakers identify with those KPIs in a KPI matrix? And then we wanted to refine it because there was a lot going on here. So we have a phase 1 evaluation, which has currently been completed by our task groups. And that was to look at all this information from the e-infra matrix, from the running list of attributes, from the running list of KPIs, and to say, what here might be a little redundant, what can be consolidated, what could be merged, just not relevant at all and should be thrown in the trash. And so that was our phase 1 evaluation. We're in a bit of an iterative process where we're actually going to go back all the way to this stage of inputs. And we're in that right now, called a phase 2 review, which will then pass through the rest of this and become a phase 2 evaluation later this year. And hopefully through this phase 1 and phase 2 evaluation, we're actually going to hit the final outputs, which is going to be this beautiful attribute model, which we will hand off and to the community for request for comment. We're looking at actually having KPIs that might be recommendations, a narrative document, maybe a peer publication, contributions to the interest group roadmap, which is an output of the interest group, and ideally a peer-reviewed published paper. So just to highlight what our relationship actually is to the interest group roadmap, because that is a separate idea. So the outcome of our working group is this attribute model that describes recommendations and considerations that all commons should consider to be part of a global open research commons, like a network that would combine everyone. The interest group will then take the recommendations into account to create a roadmap for commons to then integrate into this idea of a network. So our attribute model, the working group attribute model, which we're hoping to have completed by November 2nd of 2023 for RDA 21, is actionable on the level of individual commons. So folks who work for data commons should be able to pick up this attribute model and say, all right, this is for us directly. These are some actionable things that we can look at. The roadmap is an overarching action plan at global scale. So that would be on the level of, say, your strategic plans. And both are really key and both are necessary, but it's kind of balancing the discussions we've had so far in the plenaries about the bottom up and top down approaches. So where we are right now is, as I said, we just finished this phase 1 evaluation. And we've got a version 1 of our attribute model, a draft version 1, to be honest, because we have a workshop on Friday where we're going to be diving into solidifying what those recommendations are. So version 1 is it's not really open yet. We're not really ready for everyone to have a look at it by any means. It's not a final output, but it is an intermediary between phase 1 and phase 2 evaluations. So we're making progress, which is really exciting. Along the way, we've done some analysis on the back end, and that's resulted in some great visualizations, some of which you've seen from Karen yesterday during the co-located event. We are hoping to have these slides available. I think they're in the collaborative document, the link to them as well, but we'll be sharing them afterwards too. And so we have a video walking through all of our visualizations, as well as a link to the GitHub where all the code lives for our visualizations. Okay, so due to the size and scope of the running list of attributes that we had in this phase 1 review, that then the task groups kind of took and tried to make into something a little more workable in this version 1 that I've been talking about, it really wasn't, the reason why we had task groups is because it just wasn't reasonable to look at our GORC working group members individually and say, go review almost 600 different items and tell us what you think. That wasn't quite reasonable. So we decided to break things up by task group and have focused members look at specific areas of expertise and interest based on the GORC interest group typology. So the goal of each task group then was to assign a set of recommendations and importance levels for each attribute, feature, and KPI in their list that were divided up based on the essential elements. And this essentially was our phase 1 evaluation. So we had task group 1, which covered governance structures, rules of participation, and sustainability. Task group 2 covered human capacity and engagement. Task group 3 covered compute storage, network, and research objects. Task group 4 was interoperability and standards, and task group 5 was services and tools. I'm going to talk in a second about how big that task was. So even though some task groups had more than one essential element, I guarantee you the 2 task groups that only had one actually had the biggest share of the work, ironically. So just to put some faces or names, I guess, to this work, all the task groups were headed by either a co-chair or a highly invested member in the working group. So task group 1 was led by Francoise, task group 2 was led by Sarah Jones, I led task group 3, task group 4 was led by Andrew, and task group 5 was led by Karen. And these are the people who worked on this over the last 6 months. Our timeline for the task group started in October of 2022, and we said we're going to sprint. It was a really long sprint. We're going to sprint until March of 2023, and we did. And it was a lot of work. So looking at what the results of that evaluation were. So task group 1, governance structures, rules, participations, and sustainability. So I'm presenting on Francoise's behalf, but Francoise, if I'm missing something or you want to chip in, please just let me know. So in task group 1, they evaluated 49 items and had 6 meetings that I know of. And their methodology was to work asynchronously and to evaluate each item and then consolidate the evaluations during the meetings, which was really, really effective. So some things that came up during these recurring discussions was the balance of letting individual commons decide what was appropriate for them. We were finding that some ideas, attributes, and features were, not necessarily not relevant. They were relevant for certain types of commons that offered some services or had certain infrastructures, but they weren't necessarily relevant for everyone. And so what we decided, or what was decided in task group 1 and kind of decided in other task groups as the conversations continued, is that it's better to have a very large list that has considerations that people can take under advisement than it is to have a very small list that maybe doesn't include everything. So we're trying to be as comprehensive as possible with the idea that not everything is going to apply for everyone. And it's up to individual commons to decide what's most important for them at that particular moment. Because of course, your needs are going to change as you develop. It was also discussed multiple times that KPIs were tricky to recommend as they're really, really specific to the goals and structure of the commons. This was also something that came up multiple times throughout other task groups. KPIs were really, really hard to think about in terms of recommending to others. Oh, and that went off the bottom of the screen, but the last one says, we need to address and include qualitative as well as quantitative KPIs. So keeping in mind that not everything necessarily comes down to the numbers. Task group 2, engagement and human capacity was led by Sarah Jones, as I mentioned. They evaluated a total of 155 items, and they had 4 meetings that I know of. They evaluated synchronously during meetings, which I think is really, really impressive to evaluate that number of things in that few meetings. And some recurring discussions that came up with them were that some items were really, really granular. So in the review that we did with the phase 1 review, some things were just way too specific. They were really, really fine-grained. And so what we needed to think about is across the entire model, what kind of granularity do we actually want to have? How specific or how general? And of course, if you're too specific, then a lot of things are not going to be relevant to a lot of people. But if you're too general, then it's a nice list, but there's no directive in there. There was also found that some of the things kind of belong to more than one idea, more than one essential element, and more than one task group. So some of the things that were listed in engagement also found overlap with ICT infrastructure and research objects, as well as overlap with services and tools. So speaking of which, task group 3, ICT infrastructure and research objects. I feel like I'm walking away from the coverage of the mic. So we evaluated 105 items across 7 meetings, and we tried to adopt the idea from task group 1, which we found really, really effective, look at things asynchronously, put in our own personal perspectives, and then come and meet together and discuss. We did start a little later than the other task groups, so myself and Kyan really did sprint. We had a meeting every single week from January until March. And I really feel like Kyan was sick of looking at my face by the time we were done that sprint. It was really every single week. It was a lot of work. So what we also found was the issue of granularity. And we kind of found it both ways. We found that some things were too general and we made new attributes and features. And we also found that some things were too specific and we merged them together to create a larger category. So we did opt for higher levels of description overall, but it was interesting to see that, the way that things are talked about in our documentation and the way and how I pulled them into our phase 1 review and our phase 1 evaluation lists was that there was a mix of granularity. So we need to find a balance. It was also, again, unclear where some of our essential elements began and ended. Where does the infrastructure end and the tools and services begin? At what point is it software for users and software as an OS that's like the base for your ICT infrastructure? That was something we had to grapple with a little bit. And we also found that, TG2, so Sarah gave me a bunch of items to put in my task group, and then I just kicked them over to Karen in task group 5. So we did find there was a little bit of juggling around with the different discussions. Task group 4, interoperability and standards. And so this one was led by Andrew. They evaluated 158 items, by far the largest task group that was there. And they had 6 meetings that I know of. Maybe you had more. They did have a couple of changes in chairs, so things were a bit slow to start, but they picked it up and they very much met our deadline in March, which was great. Some recurring discussions, again, granularity and specificity. Where do we balance general and highly specific? We do need to look at, this is what we're going to be addressing. One of the main things we're going to be addressing in our workshop on Friday is what level of granularity do we have across the entire model? The task groups are able to have some cohesion within them, but we really need to look at the model as a whole. They found that including specific examples for attributes and features was critical. So you can't just say something. You need to say, where do we see this existing in our speaker series? Where do we see that existing in the landscape and in the environment? What are some concrete examples that people can follow if they want to implement a particular idea? And lastly, but certainly not least, task group 5 was led by Karen. And they evaluated 152 items over 15 meetings, and they wanted to evaluate things synchronously. And ambitious. 15 meetings over the course of about 6 months. And they also met pretty much every week, by the way. So some recurring discussions in task group 5 around services and tools. As we also found in task group 3, the boundary between standards, ICT infrastructure, and services and tools in particular was really, really difficult to separate and determine. And it's not necessarily to say like, okay, you know, you have a document that is a standard, but it's like, okay, when does that get implemented as a service? And what is the distinction between it being a document and something that's actionable? So that was a bit hard to classify. Services offered by Commons can be implemented by the Commons itself or by an external third party. So at what point, say, for example, do digitization services, if you have a physical text and the Commons hires a contractor to digitize it so that they can put it in the repository, is digitization a service offered by the Commons or something that is not offered by the Commons but contracted out and we no longer consider it part of the Commons? A bit of a circular argument. But it was an interesting thought experiment to say, does the Commons need to have staff available to do absolutely every service, or do we include things that are offered through third parties or contractors, or partner collaborators? And lastly, we need to have services that reflect and support the processes and other essential elements. So not only are the differences between the essential elements hard to classify and draw a hard boundary between, we also need to make sure that if something is stated in the standards, that it's reflected in our services. If something is available in services, we need to have the ICT infrastructure to support that service. Okay, so that was a really, really long prelude to thinking about how did this work go. And so I'm not going to be showcasing you the draft version 1 because we're going to be actively working on it on Friday. But I did want to open it to this idea of task groups tackling individual or combined essential elements. And here, is the task group function working? Is the way that we're going through this evaluation, does it make sense? Are we looking at the right kind of resources? Are we doing the right actions to get the right input from both RDA members as well as the community? And then also to ask if anyone's interested in joining task groups. Because there's always more work to do. So I do want to open it to the folks online and the audience to say, you know, I've presented the work that we've done so far over the last 6 months, definitely. Is there a better way we could be doing things? Particularly open to the task group chairs as well, where you were leading this barrage.
I do think it's worth noting that if you are interested in joining the task group, the heavy lift, version 1 was the real heavy lift. That phase 2 should be a lighter lift, if I'm right about this. That
you won't be making people meet weekly.
Only you. Yeah, so it should be, if you're at all interested in it but are a bit wary about the time commitment. I do believe that the phase 2 should be a bit smoother and yeah. Go ahead, Francois. Yeah. Oh,
do we have a microphone? Like a handheld one?
Yeah.
Yep.
So while we're passing along the microphone, yeah, I just want to agree with Karen that the phase 1 was the big heavy lift. That was our first round. Phase 2 is mostly about thinking about adding in concrete examples and including more sources.
Yes, I think that as was said, I was the task group chair for the group which had less things to do than the others, but we worked hard anyway. And I think that it was probably the only way to manage that, because having a look at this enormous amount of information would have been difficult. And then we were also focusing on the idea that we had to think about governance, and then we had to think about rules of participation, and then sustainability, and the dollar in sustainability. It's not the only point, and we found that by discussing these things. And so I think it allowed us to try to understand what the big topics were and what they meant in terms of attributes, starting from the list which was extracted from the multiple sources CJ was describing. So I am not sure there was another possible way to do that even with some time to do it. I think that it was also good to have several people in the group. CJ also helped us, because you need to have different points of view and different knowledge of what it is. What was said is that we have discussed a lot in our group, but I think in the others also, the fact that for a given commons, you have a set of attributes which are relevant, but there are others which have nothing to do. For my own one, the IVOA, you heard about it if you were yesterday, the e-infra list was really mostly not relevant, but there were other topics which were extremely relevant. So what we need to have is a multiplicity of point of view, different complementary points of view and knowledge of what a GORC can be, just to evaluate the kind of attributes which have to be here, because they can be relevant for some of the GORCs. So there is lots of work already done, because there is all this enormous amount of documentation, and all the people who spoke to give one of the case answered a questionnaire. So there is lots of things which allow to verify what we do when we do the job to think about the proposed list. So it would be very good if other people, my conclusion is it would be very good if other people would join with a complementary knowledge of the GORCs. And it was interesting, and the atmosphere is RDA atmosphere, which means friendly. And we learned things discussing with others. So please join.
Thank you for that plug, Francois. Okay, so I see another question here, and then Andrew has a comment, and both of your hands went up at the exact same moment. So Anu, if you don't mind passing it, or? All right.
I was not actively involved, but it sounds.
Keith, who are you?
So Keith Russell from the ARDC. Happened to bump into Andrew every now and then. I was not actively involved in the groups. I followed it from a distance, and I think it's really impressive what you've done. And so with so many characteristics you had to classify, I can't think of a better method of doing that. I had I'd be very interested in hopping on board from phase 1 to phase 2 if it's going to be less work, because that always less work always sounds better. Anyway, one question I had just listening to your summary, I think it was CJ, I think you mentioned it especially, that not all, and I'm not surprised by that not all characteristics would be relevant to all GORCs. That I'm not surprised by that. What I am intrigued about is, are there certain characteristics that are representative for, or that are required for all GORCs, and others that are not? So that's more of a question.
Yeah, so I'm going to take a stab at this, and by all means, other folks can jump in, but not necessarily showing this because task group 5, but showing this so that we can look at the essential elements again. So this entire center here, this graphic, I think what we kind of came to realize is that every commons has to have something in all of the essential elements. Yes. So you have a representation of all of these items in your commons in some way, shape, or form. And then of course, within these elements, we've got the attributes and features list, which then go down in granularity. So the idea was that it's not a checklist, it's not an assessment, and it's not a benchmarking tool. It's kind of intended to be an inspiration to say, you know, how could you make your commons? How could you grow your commons? What other things might be related to what you're already doing that you can kind of sidestep into, that kind of thing, and more. But certainly things that are key for every commons are going to be something within these essential elements, but not necessarily the entire list. And it's going to be really hard to say anything specific about particular attributes or particular features that we see in every commons. I've got the commons matrix, which will tell you what we've seen so far in the speaker series, certainly. But we even found, say, in particular, Francoise's commons, the IVOA, we found that where that's such a unique case, and then also looking at the rest of our speaker series, it was really hard to find two commons that were identical. Yeah. There's no two commons that are exactly alike. They serve the communities they serve well, and they have services and tools and standards and ICT infrastructure and the rest of it that's specific to their communities. So yeah, a long way to say, I think it's something you have to kind of look at all the essential elements and then look at what's inside of them to say what's relevant for you. So there's no two lists that are going to be the same for two commons. Yeah.
For instance, it's evident you need a governance, otherwise you don't exist. So
yeah, governance in particular.
Then the elements of governance can depend on what you do and the context in which you work, but it's clear that governance is to be done. There are other things in those, as CJ was saying, which are not as indispensable. So, but of course, there are things you need to have, and it's in those blocks. And then how it is implemented in terms of attributes can be different from one to the other. But I think it's a good point to think about, to tick what seems to be really needed, and then eventually to say, this can be implemented in different places. If we do a narrative about when we do the narrative about the list of attributes, it's a good thing to say there are things which you have to have, but you can implement them different ways. And you have all the examples in the list of attributes, which can help you to think about how you do it, or maybe how you can do it better.
Yeah, thank you for that. And then one thing I'll mention very, very quickly, and then Andrew, is thinking about, say, the importance level as Francois has brought up. Am I gone? Okay,
Yeah.
no. In our phase 1 evaluation, we not only did the task groups evaluate, you know, what was going to happen to each attribute, they also gave them an importance level. So I've left that out of our version 1 for the workshop because the workshop is already going to be a bit complicated as it is with so much information to look at. But the importance levels, I think, of each individual attributes are going to come back into discussion in phase 2. And I think that's where Francois's point is really going to be important. Thinking about things that are absolutely critical for everyone to consider, even if you don't implement them.
Thanks, CJ. So yesterday in one of the pre-plenary sessions, I was kind of riffing on the idea of building a commons as being like a recipe. I'm looking at this now and I'm thinking this is kind of like the essential food groups that you need to have. You need to have some at least of each of these every day. I don't know why I'm thinking about food. I'm eating way more food than I should. So I can't claim that that's the issue. So if you think of these as being like food groups, every commons needs to have a bit of each of these. Different commons will emphasize some of these to a greater or lesser degree. And as Francois says, how you might implement some of these will vary from commons to commons. But it's a useful way of thinking about what are the kinds of things you need. And if for instance, you were going to look at that and say, we don't need to worry about sustainability. First of all, I want to talk to you and find out how you're going to keep going. But secondly, if you're going to say no to any of those, you really need to have thought through what it would mean to have no governance, no engagement, no governance structures, no rules. I mean, you could go through the entire list. The other point that I wanted to make is that the work of the interest group, which is initially this set of essential elements, was, I guess it was kind of more of a theoretical piece of work. It was thinking through, based on the knowledge of the people involved, what are the things that we saw as essential? And it took us, I'm guessing, probably a couple of years to land on that and test it with the community. The work of the working group is essentially coming at it from a different direction. It's saying, let's look at things that people have actually built, real world examples. Let's look at what they have decided are the essential attributes and elements. Let's try and boil them down and abstract them. And then let's use them as a test case for this. So one of the things that's going to come out of the activity of the working group is, if you like, a way of validating whether this model, this set of essential elements is missing anything, or whether we need to break some of them up, or have we got it right? But it's if you like, if you think of the work of the interest group and working group as very complementary, trying to converge on an answer to the same set of questions. I really like the phrase that, so I'll just say this and then shut up. I really like the phrase that CJ put on one of the earlier slides, or possibly Karen. So the attribute model is actionable at the level of an individual commons. So this is us trying to look at what are the attributes of an individual commons. The roadmap is an overarching action plan on a global scale. So once we've identified these are the essential elements for commons, then you can start looking at, okay, so how are we going to fit commons together? How are we going to map them onto each other? How are we going to make sure that you can interoperate across them? So yeah, the work of the working group looks big and complex because we're working across a huge amount of material. But I actually think the next phase is going to be much more manageable.
Agreed. And so with that, I'm going to continue on because we're already over time and we want to hear from the EOSC Finnish forum as well. I do see hands going up, and I encourage you, if you have time at the end, to join in the discussion or to find myself or the co-chairs during the coffee break. Really sorry that we have to rush through.
So yeah, and also will you please sign into the rolling notes? You can also leave questions in the rolling notes and we will get back to you on that as well, if that helps. Yep. Sorry, CJ.
No, it's perfect. Thank you, Karen. So I've talked about we have a workshop on Friday. So the purpose of the workshop is to get that version 1 done, and we are going to then use that in the phase 2 so that we can build on it and then have an output in November. What that timeline looks like, I am not going to be reading every single thing on these slides because again, we're cutting it close here. But we kind of organize things in blocks. So the past 6 months, this is what we did. We did a phase 1 review and a phase 1 evaluation. We're going to be then reviewing what comes out of the workshop. We're going to then we're going to do a phase 2 evaluation with task groups. They're going to look at the stuff that's relevant for them first. And then they're going to review things from other task groups. So they're going to kind of do like a peer review over the 3 months after that. Our request for comment, our scheduled request for comment, which may be flexible, begins September 14th. So that's when the RDA community can expect to see a version of a final output from this working group. We're then going to present our final results at RDA 21, and request for comment will end on October 12th, just beforehand. So we'll present like the real final outputs then, and then submission in November. So the same way that I think 6 months looked like a long time in October of 2022, this looks like a long time until October, November of 2023. But the task groups can tell you that those weeks pass pretty quickly. All right, and so I'm going to skip over this one. This is just our individual month to month. I encourage people in the task groups to have a look at what I'm asking you to do specifically, because this is all laid out for you, but I will just point out that we have some excellent speakers lined up for anyone who wants to join the GORC working group itself, join the task groups, or to just come into our meetings and listen to the comments. That would be great, because we have a full lineup starting in April all the way through August, and then our last working group meeting will be in September. All right, so next steps for us, workshop on Friday. We're going to continue our speaker series, and we'll hear from IBICT in Brazil on April 27th. Our meeting groups are always online at 1300 UTC, so join if you can. And moving into the phase 2 evaluation. Lastly, but not leastly, of course, as we move into the phase 2 evaluation, we're going to want to turn and look at our writing outputs as well, the narrative document, the peer published paper, something that accompanies a model. And so the forms of the outputs are also open to discussion, and we'll be continuing that in the workshop on Friday too. And with that, I will hand it over to Anu.
Okay, is this working? Yes. Hello, everybody. My name is Anu Märkälä. I come from CSC IT Center for Science from Finland, and where I work as a project manager, mainly focusing on EOSC projects. And today I'm here with my hat of the EOSC Finnish Forum. And thank you for having us as guests in your session. And I think I can speak for all of us in EOSC Finnish Forum that we find your work very interesting, and we look forward to the next plenary and reading the final version of your document. And the point of us being here today is to bring some practical examples of EOSC implementation in Finnish context, mapping against the essential elements that you have nicely listed in the beautiful graph. So let's go forward, if this works.
Maybe the other one.
The other one, all right.
Yeah.
The wrong direction. Yeah, so we have two speakers today from the EOSC Finnish Forum. First, we have Marita Kari from Federation of Finnish Learned Societies, who will speak about the open science and research coordination in Finland and how that all links to EOSC. And then we have Hanna-Mari Puuska from CSC, who will speak about the national service development and national stakeholders through the research.fi example. And then at the end, we have time for discussion. So if there are questions that weren't addressed, maybe we can go back to them as well. And here's just a graphical illustration of what I was just telling you. So we will touch upon a few of the essential elements. We don't have time to go through all of them, but we thought we bring two speakers to tell more about EOSC implementation in respect these elements in Finland. And in the interest of time, I will leave the floor to our speakers, and I hope the line is working in the background and Marita is ready to start her presentation.
Thank you very much, Anu. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, we can.
Great. So I'm very excited to have the opportunity to present the Open Science and Research Coordination in Finland and also the EOSC Finnish Forum to this audience. Can I have the next slide?
Ooh, that was painful.
It was working just fine.
Right.
Something's happening in the background. Thank you, technicians. Can you make it in full?
And the next one, if it's possible.
Yes, we're getting there. Okay, let's have another go. So now?
Great, yes. So firstly, just a short intro to what Open Science and Research Coordination in Finland is and what we do. In the center, we have our expert panels, and the whole thing is coordinated by our steering group, where we have representatives of all the major associations in science and research in Finland. That is the universities of applied sciences, and then also various other research involved organizations. And the work is divided into 4 expert panels, which are for the culture of open scholarship, open access to publications, data, and open education. And these expert panels then have working groups, and the secretariat where I work, we support and coordinate this work that's done led by the steering group and done in the expert panels and working groups. Next, please. So the important part of what we do is that we have a national declaration of open science, and everyone involved in our work and also in the work of EOSC Finnish Forum have to be signatories to the declaration of open science and research in Finland. And the declaration is then supported by policies that outline more in detail the strategic principles, objectives, and action plans for each of these 4 areas. And then more detailed guidance is given in recommendations. In some areas, we have more recommendations and some less. It depends also how the expert panels want to structure their work. And the policies have sub-policies, and we are still in the forming stage of this whole structure, and some policies are still forthcoming. Can I have the next slide? And then policies, the declaration and policies as such are very important, but it's also very important to be able to implement what is formed in these documents. And we have in the Secretariat, we have a very strong focus on communication. We have our website, avointiede.openscience.fi. We arrange 4 regular events and then multiple more occasion-based events. And we also actively promote the events arranged by EOSC Finnish Forum on our website. And we also have several open science and research related awards that receive quite nice attention from our expert community. Then we are in charge, and that is my main task in the Secretariat. We do monitoring of open science in Finland, and then that monitoring flows into EOSC monitoring. I will talk about that a bit later. And then maybe an important example of other work we do is that we are currently developing reference architecture for open science and research in Finland. Next slide. And the next one. And then this is, yes, the Finnish Forum. It was established in 2021, sorry, and it is an informal structure, so it's not a part of the EOSC association, and you don't have to pay anything to be a part of the forum or to become a member of the forum, and it is really a forum open for everyone interested in the topic to discuss and exchange information about what is happening in EOSC, and also about what we want to bring from Finland into EOSC to be discussed and also hopefully sometimes implemented. Can I have the next slide? So here we have more in detail what the forum is striving to achieve. So it is not only for the research organizations, but it's also, we have also members from the business sector and also other parts of the society. And it is about, because EOSC is an international organization, we want to bring it closer to our organizations and our people. And it is noteworthy that many of the experts in our or in the open science expert panels and in EOSC Forum, we have quite a bit of overlap of people working in both organizations and interested in the work of both organizations. And it is, like I said earlier, it is also about providing feedback and ideas to the direction of EOSC, not only about informing about EOSC matters in Finland. And then we also want to facilitate collaboration in the context of EOSC and the different EOSC programs. Can I have the next one? And the types of organizations, we have, like I mentioned, universities of applied sciences, then different research organizations, service providers, and funding agencies. And members are individuals, and it doesn't cost, and they have to sign the declaration, the National Declaration of Open Science and Research. Next slide. And then this forum is connected to EOSC in one direction, and then the other directions are it is funded by the Ministry of Education and Culture in Finland. The office that coordinates the activities is located in CSC, where Anu and Hanna-Mari, the next speaker, both work. Then we have a coordinating committee that has members of the Ministry, the Academy of Finland, the Finnish Federation of Learned Societies, and also members of the EOSC Association. And the coordinating committee works together both with EOSC and the Open Science Coordination. Next. And communicating about EOSC and EOSC related matters is a key task, and the Open Science Coordination in TSV, in the Learned Societies of Finland, provides a channel for reaching out to the open science experts in Finland on EOSC related matters, and it is done by the website and the events calendar. It is EOSC is also regularly featured in the newsletter that the Open Science Coordination does monthly. Then there is a specific mailing list for the EOSC Finnish forum. And then, of course, today, social media is also an important channel. Next, please. So now, how this all works together. A very concrete example is that the Open Science Coordination does a national survey on the development of open science and research in Finland. It's a biannual survey, and we also use quantitative data that we pull out from different sources. And this data is then, the results of the survey are made available through research.fi that Hanna-Mari will be talking more in the next presentation. And we collect the Finnish data, and the Finnish national monitoring is structured so that the questions in the EOSC monitoring that are addressed to research performing organizations can be answered through this national survey, so that because these surveys are quite complex, long documents that require quite a lot of work from research organizations to reply to. Instead of them getting one survey from EOSC and another nationally, the national survey also covers the EOSC questions. And it actually works well. We had our first round of national monitoring in 2022, and this year we are using the results of the national survey to fill in the EOSC survey that is actually ongoing at the moment. And what we can also do is that we can, from what we learned in the national survey and from the feedback we get from our experts in our expert panels when we develop the national survey, we feed back that to the EOSC survey on their questions when relevant. So this is very interactive and efficient way of trying to develop those surveys so that they would best tell the situation of open science and research in Finland and how it's performing in the EOSC-related questions. So thank you. This was my part. So now I will hand over to Hanna-Mari.
Thank you, Marita. And indeed, next is Hanna-Mari's turn. Let's go to the right slide set. Hanna-Mari, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Can you hear me?
Very well, thank you.
Okay, great. Good afternoon from sunny Finland. Great to be part of this session. Interesting speakers before as well. Okay, so my topic is how EOSC, one of the commons presented here, is benefiting our national service development. And my example is a Finnish national research information system called Research FI. Next slide, please. Okay, so Research FI is an service owned by the Finnish Ministry of Education and Culture, and we develop and maintain it here at CSC. It aims to compile all information of research produced in Finland, so that no information is manually input, but everything is compiled from other sources automatically, from institutional, national, international sources. So it includes like publications, projects, research data, funding calls, infrastructures, organizations from Finland. And its purpose is to provide an overall picture and comprehensive information base of the research produced in Finland, so that anyone can go to Research FI in their web browser and search for the topics that they are interested in, and then find people, publications, or other research output from that particular topic. And then it also provides information basis for the authorities like the Ministry of Education and Culture that allocates funding for the universities. For example, the publication output is one of the funding criteria of Finnish universities. So this is also an information basis for that. Next slide, please. So how this is related to EOSC? So one of the core components of EOSC architecture is a EOSC research graph, which is a bit similar concept to what Research FI is at national level. So it aims to act as a discovery tool across EOSC resources. And it aims to interlink research entities across domains and data sources on the basis of persistent identifiers. So that, as said, our national CRIS system, like Research FI, already captures information that can be populated also at the European level, namely the EOSC research graph. And on the other side, we can also get information from EOSC to Research FI. And as I said before, national level authorities like funders, policymakers, other stakeholders also use these national platforms to in research assessment, monitoring, research activities like open science, and also giving credit to researchers and their open science activities. And also at the national level, it's like in Finland, it's used for the allocation of funding of universities. So currently, EOSC is also aiming to support this kind of assessments, and the recent GORC research assessment reform recommendation, so that EOSC can also provide input on research information, provide indicators and metrics needed at national level. Next slide. Our research FI team is contributing to two big EOSC projects funded by Horizon Europe that are currently running. CSC is participating also other projects, but these two are related to what we are doing in research FI. So the two projects are FAIRCORE for EOSC and CRASP-OS both have started last year. Next slide. First about the FAIRCORE for EOSC project. It's a 3-year project, a very big one, 10 million funding from the Horizon, 22 partners. It's coordinated by CSC. Next. Okay, and what it aims to develop is actual technical components for EOSC. I won't go into detail of all these. There are nine core components for EOSC. One most relevant for us is the research discovery graph that aims to deliver advanced discovery tools to EOSC resources and communities. But there are also other components that support interoperability, exchange of information, and quality of information at the European level. Next one, please. And then, yeah, maybe we can skip over this slide. So you can go straight to the next one. So this is an example how we will benefit, but also give benefit to EOSC by exchanging information between the EOSC research discovery graph and research FI. So this is an example publication that we have in our database in research FI. So the publications have persistent identifiers like DOIs and URNs, so that we can then link them to publications that are there in the EOSC services. So our aim is to find links between different research output like publications, research data, or research infrastructures, projects, people, so that we can sort of find out, for example, what publications were produced in this and this project, what data sets are related to this publication. And this is information that we can gather from Finnish local and national sources like universities, funders, then harvest them into research FI and then provide them to EOSC services, or on the other way around, this information can lie in the EOSC services, and then we can import it to research FI from there, and then we can have a more comprehensive information about research Finland, and this will also improve our search features in research FI portal, so that you can, if you're interested in topics in like sustainable development or the topic of this publication, then you can get a more comprehensive view on what has been done in this area, what projects are related to this topic, and so on. The next one, please. About the other project that we are involved in is called CRASP-OS, also a 3-year project, a little smaller with a 3 million euros budget. It's coordinated by Athena RC in Greece, and there are 18 partners all around Europe involved in this project. Its objective is to develop, as put into operation, a federated infrastructure of research metrics and indicators, and also enable policy reforms for research assessment at both individual, institutional, organizational, and country level. The next one, please. This is the CRASP OS concept in an overview, but will not go through all these components, but just to mention that the project is also focusing on both the conceptual framework of developing metrics indicators related to monitoring open science at all these individual institutional and national levels, and also creating information infrastructure for that. So it provides information, tools, and services in addition to the indicator framework. So next one, please. So how Research.fi is related to this CRASP OS project? We are part of one of the pilots that aims to support open science research assessment for funders and national stakeholders. So we are going to pilot the indicators developed in the open science assessment framework in the CRASP OS project, and test how they can fit it or integrate it in the Research.fi information basis. Also, we will pilot the sort of researchers openness profile that has actually previously been developed in knowledge exchange network, so that we will then pilot how it would fit in the Research.fi's researchers profile tool. And also we will use this Open Metrics Federated infrastructure to populate its information in Research.fi if it's connected to Finnish research or Finnish researchers. And also we can provide information that is gathered in Research.fi to this Open Metrics Federated infrastructure. And this is also based on the technical exchange that we are developing in the FAIRCO for EOSC project. And next one. This is again an example that how we can use the output from the CRASP OS project, so that in Research.fi, the researcher can create his or her profile there and add the information from their home organization or their ORCID profile or potentially other sources as well in the future. And there are like some basic information about the researcher, affiliation, education, publication, and so on. But what we could use from the output of the CRASP OS project is the open science activities of the researcher. That might be like open research output, open science skills, promoting activities, promoting open science, or so. So this is information that we can exchange between our national Research.fi and the EOSC related federated open metrics infrastructure. And this is something that we are going to test and pilot in this CRASP OS project. Okay, so the next one is sort of a summary how we think we benefit at national level from EOSC and its services, and these two projects in particular. So that by contributing to these projects, we can gain new competencies that we can use to improve our national service Research.fi and other services as well. We exchange information on Finnish research and Finnish researchers between the European level system and on our national level Research.fi. And we also have an opportunity to influence the EU level developments by bringing our expertise there. And then also, especially through the CRASP OS project, we are also able to promote the research assessment reform movement in Finnish, and also sort of benchmark and collaborate with the other countries. And by that, we can also strengthen collaboration with the national stakeholders, like the Federation of Finnish Learned Societies that Marita Kari was telling about in the previous presentation, and higher education institutions, ministries, funders, and so on. So this was a very short summary how we think we can benefit from EOSC in Finland. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Hanna-Maria and Marita, for these flavors of some of the essential elements in the EOSC implementation context. And I think we have still a little while for questions. Or CJ, would you want to take the floor for some final remarks?
We have about 5 minutes for any discussion on challenges, developments, and next steps for the EOSC Finnish Forum and the presentations that they've led. If there are no discussion points people want to bring up about the last couple of presentations we just heard, we're happy to return back to some GORC working group discussions. So the floor is open. I know there were hands raised earlier. Oh, red shirt. I don't know everyone's name.
Bring the mic to you so the remote participants can hear you as well.
Thank you. Actually, I put my notes in because I didn't know I've had the opportunity to write the question, and Andrew's addressed it, but I think it's worth a wider comment. So I'm Carol Goebel. I'm from University of Manchester, but along with Susanna Sanson, who's also here, we're doing a biocommons actually for the UK, which is part of an entire collection of commons activities that is being developed now. And so we find this work incredibly interesting and useful, but to be prospective, like how do we go about setting up and putting together the business cases and the structure of our commons now. But I did spend about an hour of meeting trying to find the documents, trying to find your outputs, trying to really understand. And the site, I can't give it to our funders because there isn't the information. So can I ask you to not be afraid to put the information up early, because perfect in November is too late and imperfect now is ideal. So can I ask you to do that?
I would definitely I'm not even technically a co-chair yet, so I'm going to defer to the current co-chairs on how we feel about that.
I mean, I think maybe it's a matter of just sitting down with you to certainly weed through. You're right. There's a lot of content. So we can certainly step through and make that more transparent to you. But everything is already open, even if it's not easily parsable, maybe. So please, Andrew and I and Mark or CJ and I will be happy to sit down with you and get you some preliminary results. Yeah.
I will say that all of our documents are on the GORC working group RDA page. So the group on the RDA website everything's listed there, but it's not listed in outputs because these aren't official outputs yet. But we definitely hear you that it makes more sense to have it a little bit easier to transverse as people come into it. It's very much built for the people who are in the working group right now. So we'll expand the audience.
So this is, hello. Yeah, this is Bob Hanish from NIST. I just want to point out that in the US, I represent NIST on something called the OSTP Subcommittee on Open Science. And in that group, I co-chair a subgroup focusing on open science infrastructure. Last summer, some of you may have seen an editorial that came out in Science advocating for an open research commons in the United States. And I was a main instigator of that activity and a co-author on that paper. And I'm trying to use this OSTP platform to push for implementation of such an open science infrastructure in the United States. We are waiting for your results. So I want to sort of underscore Carol's comments as well. You know, the sooner the better, the more that we can lean on the outputs of this group to make the arguments that the US needs to get its act together and put together a national infrastructure that is complementary to those that we see emerging around the world, the better for us. I do participate sort of peripherally in the group, but again, I think the outputs of this are critically important for advancing other open research commons enterprises across the world and in particular in the US. So thanks for the good work and push it out the door as fast as you can.
All right, we definitely heard that one loud and clear. Thank you. So maybe the best we can do with everything being so jam-packed this week is once we have that kind of draft version 1 complete, like kind of agreed upon within our group on Friday, that's a really good place for us to start making things a little bit more transparent and public. So I think what we can say is probably not this week you'll start seeing those site maps and tree maps of links, but definitely in very, very early April is when we can start kind of showcasing things, but definitely with the big stamp of draft, not complete, not finished.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you, Hillary. All right, so I think we are at coffee time now.
Coffee.
Yeah. So it is 3:30. Definitely encourage folks to come up and talk to us if you'd like. I know that there's a lot that we covered today from both the EOSC Finnish Forum as well as the GORC Working Group, but thank you so much for sticking out through this presentation. It was great to have you here.